Bulavinaka, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Elisha Foon. Coming up.
Philip Mehrtens learn about our life and Indonesian occupations. Our expectation is he should tell this to international community, especially in the New Zealand government.
I speak with the regional commander of the West Papua Liberation Army, who held New Zealand pilot Philip Mehrtens hostage for 19 months. Also a rapid decline in global wildlife populations, and later on calls to protect Pacific reefs following New Zealand's Manawanui ship sinking in Samoa. West Papuan rebels who took New Zealander Philip Mehrtens hostage has denied claims he was bribed to set the pilot free last month. In an exclusive interview, I spoke with the regional commander of West Papua National Liberation Army, General Igiannis Kagoya, who detailed the reasons for the kidnapping. New Zealand pilot Philip Mehrtens saying goodbye to locals and being gifted a chicken, which he carried onto the helicopter. His ride to freedom. His captor, 20-year-old General Igiannis Kagoya, says 6 decades of calls for independence contributed to the hostage-taking. His words are translated.
Yes, we are opening the eyes and ears international communities. Now, global communities, including New Zealand government, should listen us, give us attention about our struggle.
As Philip Mehrtens gets back to normal life after being held hostage for 19 months, Igiannis Kagoya says he has no regrets and explains why he did it.
We are not barbaric. We are not terrorists. We are not criminal. Because Indonesian government always criminalize us, labeling us and inhuman. And international communities should listen us, give attention about our suffering and our struggle to get independence on our own land.
Very little about West Papua reaches the outside world, because Indonesia tightly controls access for foreign journalists and human rights monitors. After Philip Mehrtens was released, a West Papua National Liberation Army spokesperson, Sibi Sambum, claimed a local politician bribed Igiannis Kagoya to free the New Zealander. General Kagoya says that's not true.
Spokesperson Sibi Sambum reactions emotionally because Igiannis released pilot without coordinating with him. No, they no receive bribe money, never receive money, and will not receive money. And please show me the evidence. Where is the evidence? When and who give him money?
The Indonesian embassy says the captors did not ask for money, and Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters has dismissed suggestions of a bribe as disgraceful. Pacific academic Stephen Ratuva says internal fractures within the rebel group might explain the conflicting information. He says the question of West Papua independence needs to be addressed.
For years and years, they have been fighting for freedom, and they've been trying to attract international attention. One of the options they had was to do what they did. I'm not saying that it was the right thing to do. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that the circumstances in their situation has created a condition where, I suppose, they ended up doing what they were doing.
The area where Philip Mehrtens was held remains an extremely dangerous place for West Papuans, often caught up in deadly attacks with the Indonesian military.
We are ran to the jungle, and then there is no food. When we add leaf the trees, he also add the leaf of the trees. And we respect him about his attitude and his character. We respect him and we protect him as human being.
The Free Papua movement seeks the independence of Papua from Indonesia after it was controversially brought under Indonesian control in a vote overseen by the United Nations in 1969. Human Rights Watch's Andreas Hosano says West Papuans have been overtaken by Indonesian settlers.
Indigenous Papuan were about 95% back in 1960s. Now they are less than 50%, 43%, according to the latest census.
He says as an Indonesian, he's disappointed by the mistreatment of West Papuans.
I am really ashamed. Every time I landed in any West Papuan city, elite Papuan are upset. They used to be doctors, they used to be engineers. All those businesses were taken over. The owners were accused to be pro-independence Papuan. That's why many of them become very angry. Not only those in the jungle, but also in the cities.
General Kagoya says he wants Mehrtens to tell of his experience.
Philip Mehrtens learn about our life and Indonesian occupations. He knows, he experienced daily life. Our expectation is he should tell this to international community, especially in the New Zealand government and New Zealand's communities, telling them what happening, his own experience, this very awful situation.
The Indonesian embassy says its government is committed to its long-standing policy of respecting and promoting human rights and will not tolerate misconduct by its security forces. But it says hostage-taking can never be justified. Philip Mehrtens is now reunited with his wife and son and has been approached for comment. For more on this story, go to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. A new report has found the average size of global wildlife populations has shrunk by 73% over the past 50 years. The startling findings, recently published by the World Wildlife Fund's 2024 Living Planet report, show freshwater populations have suffered the heaviest declines, falling by 85%, followed by terrestrial, 69%, and marine populations at 56%. The figures for the Pacific are similarly high at around 60% overall, with the average decline in wildlife populations. Koroi Hawkins spoke with the Chief Executive of WWF New Zealand, Kayla Kingdom-Bebb, about the report.
Yeah, so the Living Planet report is kind of a seminal publication that WWF issues every 2 years. And it's a comprehensive study of trends in global biodiversity and in the health of the planet. It includes the Living Planet Index, which tracks basically how wildlife populations have fared around the world over a 50-year period. And these indicators can help us learn and understand more about the state of the natural world. And the news isn't good. We're losing species and wildlife at a rate faster now than in any time before in human history. And the report shows that there's been a decline of 73% between 1970 and 2020 in wildlife globally. And that's across all domains. So freshwater, terrestrial, and in the ocean. The report shows that the freshwater populations have suffered the worst, a decline of 85%, incredibly, followed by terrestrial, which is about 69, and also marine, which is 56. And that's globally. So even within the Asia-Pacific region, we've seen a decline of 60%.
Is the major factor human activity?
Yes. The drivers of biodiversity loss, nature loss, are pretty well understood. And generally speaking, the leading cause of decline is habitat loss. So particularly land clearance for food production, or in the context of the marine domain, overfishing, bottom trawling. But we also know that in Aotearoa and throughout the Pacific, we are dealing with other drivers like invasive species, which are a real issue as well.
For New Zealand and the Pacific, are there any specifics in the report about the situation in our neck of the woods?
Well, there's a host of examples that are drawn upon, but what we've seen in the last few years particularly are mass coral bleaching events throughout Oceania and the Pacific. And that's coral bleaching is, incredibly concerning. It's sort of one of these issues that sits at the nexus of climate change and biodiversity loss. And we see that with sea level, marine heat waves and sea level rising. And the Pacific is really susceptible to this. Every bleaching event weakens the coral. It leaves it unable to cope with other pressures like pollution and overfishing, which we know are also, drivers of loss. And we need healthy marine environments. We need healthy reef systems, not only for food security. So many Pacific islands depend on healthy reefs for food sustainability. Also, of course, for tourism, but we also know that they play a really important role in mitigating climate change. So both in terms of the fact that healthy reef systems sequester huge amounts of carbon, but also for low-lying atolls like Kiribati, The reef system actually produces sand, right? It's having a healthy reef for low-lying atoll nations is absolutely critical for them to be able to withstand rising sea levels. Specifically, this Living Planet report, in addition to the mass coral bleaching events, it also talks about key species that we see within the region. So leatherback turtles is a species that we see throughout the Pacific, including in Aotearoa. The Living Planet report shows one example whereby the annual number of leatherback turtle nests on one of the key breeding beaches has declined by 78% in the last 27 years, which is pretty alarming. And, in New Zealand, the state of our biodiversity is pretty dire, right? We have the highest rate of threatened species per capita globally. So 4,000 of our native species are threatened or at risk of extinction. And that's like 90% of our seabirds, 90, crazy. Over 30% of our marine mammals, a great number of our terrestrial species as well. The picture is pretty bleak.
Is there any good news?
The good news is that there's hope. We're approaching, the state of things is not good. We're approaching what we would describe as a tipping point, where if you lose more, you begin to suffer irreversible loss. But we're not quite there yet. And there is still time for countries, the international community, local communities to take meaningful and really impactful action to halt and address nature loss at the same time as countering climate change. And it's going to require concerted effort and investment. The reason I'm in Sydney right now is because Australia has hosted the first ever Global Biodiversity Nature Positive Summit, where it's not just governments. There was lots of government ministerial representation here, especially through the Pacific, a very, very strong ministerial Pacific presence, but also finance and business leaders and environmental experts. And we've all convened here to talk about the opportunities in halting reversing nature loss in line with those 2030 goals. And it requires transformation of our food systems. It'll require a shift to renewable energy. It will require more nature-friendly practices like reducing overfishing and addressing plastic pollution. But it's possible. It's possible. It just requires investment and considered action and urgent action.
One of the final tasks the Manawanui undertook was surveying another wrecked vessel stranded on a Pacific reef. In 2022, a Taiwanese fishing vessel ran aground on Niue's Beveridge Reef. 11 people were rescued. Niue Oceanwide Trust project manager Brendan Pasisi told Lydia Lewis work is needed to ensure this never happens again, work which was started by the now defunct Manawanui.
There is an ongoing discussion being had and negotiation with the national authorities between the government and Taiwan and the company as to, what was carried out there, notwithstanding the issue around some potential shark fishing gear. But the fact that a cleanup or a penalty for polluting what is considered a pristine reef area is something that, remains to be done. We do want to send a strong message that, it's not something that we condone, obviously. Accidents will continue to happen, and, we are looking at ways to make the reef more visual, and that was, one of the activities undertaken recently last year with the New Zealand Navy of the warship Manawanui, doing a site survey for the installation of radar reflectors, etc. Because, this is not the first vessel to hit the reef. There have been others in the past. There's also been, I think, yachts and other vessels. Embedded deeply in the reef are some very old Admiralty anchors and chains, and so the reef has laid claim to seafarers for some time. But this day and age, that should be preventable.
And you're still waiting for the final report from the initial investigation stage in the early days. What happened and who was notified in the beginning?
Sort of within 2 hours of having been advised and notifying our partners, Global Fish Watch, MPA, who had brought us on board under a pilot phase of their project. They came back to us with some initial findings, and it really indicated to me, at least, that the vessel was under sort of innocent passage. It was traversing our EEZ to go fishing down in the high seas, given that it wasn't a licensed vessel to Niue, and just ran straight into the reef. So we wanted to do some checks to verify that they weren't in fact fishing, and we were able to marry that up against the earlier sort of surveillance footage from the New Zealand Royal Air Force, and it appeared that all the vessel's fishing equipment was stowed. Yeah, and so from the vessel's track and its speed, that was the indications, at least to me. We shared that internally with the police here, obviously, fisheries, and yeah, subsequently, a rescue operation was mounted, as well as surveillance of the situation, organized with the Tongan government, and they sent to Niue's support a Guardian-class new surveillance vessel, picked up the head of fisheries here and one of his officers, and they proceeded up to the reef, only to find the vessel burnt to the waterline, or still burning, early hours of the following morning, after the crew had been rescued by another Taiwanese long-line vessel which had come up from the southern high seas.
Does the vessel being burnt out, though, raise any suspicions at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, after sort of 3 days or more sitting there, and then suddenly, coincidentally, as the last person sort of is safely removed, a vessel catches fire, just seemed too much of a coincidence. So it definitely sends up red flags. Either, I guess, a number of scenarios, one being that knowing that it's a sort of fiberglass reinforced plastic vessel, they know that most of their equipment and everything will burn. You often burn things when you're trying to hide evidence, whether they had been fishing illegally elsewhere in the region, I'm not sure. Or it could be that they simply wanted to remove the majority of the vessel so that they weren't liable for any, sort of additional cleanup or recovery costs that might be imposed on them. I'm not sure. But, subsequently, we were able to get up there and survey the site to monitor the impact and to look at the removal of any environmentally damaging toxic materials or what have you, and also to see, sort of how widespread that was on the reef.
Can you please describe what you saw on the seafloor when you were able to go down and see it for yourself?
There were hooks with wire traces, which is actually, something that can be used for fishing for sharks, and therefore, it's not actually permitted to carry those sorts of, that kind of equipment. And so I think that's what the ongoing case with, in terms of evidence was from the government interests here and the regional interest, I guess, with FFA. And so, that's ongoing.
About 5,000 square metres of reef has since been damaged by the Manawanui off the southern coast of Samoa. That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tofa soifua.